The people of the city have gone missing. The process has started to invade, and the Camerata have stolen your voice. But they made a mistake, and now that they've tried to take everything from you, there's nothing standing in your way. Transistor is an action game where you play the silent protagonist, a young woman named Red. Right at the start of the game, robotic monsters have begun attacking the city, and she acquires a talking sword with which to defend herself. Typical gameplay has you exploring the levels, enjoying the scenery, and fighting robots in small cordoned-off arenas. After you defeat your enemies, you're awarded experience, and will eventually start unlocking new abilities and power-ups. The levels are linear with only rare deviation, although you will occasionally find side rooms where you can engage in challenges to grind out some extra experience. Now, Transistor has a fairly interesting approach to combat. For starters, despite having a magic sword, Red has no basic attacks. Instead, she has a wide variety of attacks and abilities that she can select from, and then assign to 4 different action buttons. During combat, pressing a specific button activates the ability, and outside of encounters, you can pick and choose what powers you want in order to customize your strategy or playstyle. Now, while you are only able to equip 4 powers per encounter, you will eventually be able to unlock the ability to combine powers. Different attacks can be layered into one another for increased effectiveness. So, depending upon your combination, your long-range attack might suddenly shoot faster or farther, or even start bouncing between enemies. On top of all this, you also have a time stop power. Essentially, at any time, Red can pause what's happening to take a turn outside of the normal flow of combat, where she can queue up attacks and make it so that her targets are getting maximum damage. Once you're satisfied that things are lined up properly, you can press a button and activate all of your attacks in the space of a few short seconds. Now, there is a downside to this power. Every time you use it, you enter a cooldown period where not only can you not stop time, you cannot use any of your powers. The dodge skill is the only exception, so if you haven't selected your powers carefully, you're going to wind up being completely defenseless during this period. Besides the gameplay, Transistor's other unique feature is its very hands-off, eyes-open plot. It's an ambiguous story, to say the least, and nothing is ever really explained to you, the player. Instead, the background is only ever hinted at through text logs and audio cues and background conversations. Now, I should say that while I find Transistor very interesting, I have some, not necessarily criticisms, but perhaps unfavorable observations about it. Things that spoiled my enjoyment. For starters, the combat is very unforgiving. Not necessarily hard, unforgiving. As I mentioned before, Red has no basic abilities. All the powers you have in battle, you have to select ahead of time. And if you make a poor selection, you're going to be faced with frustration and disappointment. I mean, here, watch me try and defeat this common enemy with one of the basic abilities. Yeah, I can't do it. I can't do it. And sure, with proper skill selection, you can probably avoid situations like this. But what's really aggravating is that on top of situations like this, the difficulty really spikes in the second half of the game. And it gets to the point where your time stop becomes no longer a helpful ability, but an absolute necessity, since it is the only way you are fast enough and accurate enough to consistently deal damage to your enemies. My other concern is, well, kind of the story. Now, sure, the story is what it is, and that's not my problem, but the way it was told, that was a deliberate choice. And I'm kind of of the opinion that if you're not going to tell me what's going on, eventually I'm kind of not going to care. And when it gets to that point, it's really hard for me to reinvest in any emotional climaxes you might have planned. Still, despite my concerns, I didn't dislike Transistor. I'd actually give it 3 out of 4 stars. It has an interesting aesthetic, it's got some good music, and it's got a neat gameplay feature where you can tailor your attacks and abilities for combat. Also, I would recommend it. My concerns might not be yours, and you might welcome the challenge and the mystery. Alright, that's enough for today. Play me off, Red. One last lullaby.